The Vikings introduced their brand new general manager, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, today. And alongside me here in TCO Studios is ESPN's Courtney Cronin. And Courtney, you have been on this beat for a while now and have several colleagues throughout the league. What were the impressions of this hire with people that you spoke to?
Yeah, I think it's an out-of-the-box hire because it's not the traditional somebody who starts out as an intern in the NFL in the scouting world, working in operations, and then working their way up through the ranks of a front office to become the de facto head scout, the top football executive who has that personnel evaluation background. Like, this was a different type of hire, and I think this is exactly what we expected here in Minnesota, given Mark Wilf, the day that the Minnesota Vikings fired both Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, had talked about a collaborative approach, hiring great communicators, great collaborators, and doing things in a different way. So I think we all fully anticipated that they would end up casting a really wide net for candidates, which they did. Take a look at the 8 candidates that were initially brought in for the general manager position. Aside from the person who got it in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, you have people with football backgrounds. You have Catherine Raish, who was the first woman to interview for a GM position in the modern era. You have younger candidates. You have people with a multitude of different experiences in the NFL. And when you hire somebody like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I think that just shows that the shift is happening. It's starting here in Minnesota because you don't see too many general managers with backgrounds like this. Somebody who did not play football professionally, somebody who was not in the coaching ranks or in the scouting ranks. I mean, he has an economics background. He was a commodities trader. He worked on Wall Street. And that's different for this type of role, doing things differently than this franchise has done for, the better part of 2 decades.
This was the first time we really heard from him specifically, though. So what did you learn from, in his words, new today about Kwesi?
Well, the first thing I wanted to ask him about was that buzzword, analytics, because there can be a negative connotation to that. I tend to think sometimes you look at football front offices and where you've got the analytics people who are considered the numbers people, and then you've got the football guys, the meathead football people that sometimes get the bad reputation, but there's a way to meld the two, which I think is really, really important. Like, the one thing that I got from Kwesi that I really appreciated in that answer is that analytics, for him, it's not just, let's throw out a bunch of numbers and let the computers play football effectively. I think that's sometimes a negative connotation that analytics get in the football community. It's finding the why behind the problem that you're trying to solve, the question that you're trying to answer, and that you can meld the personnel side of things, people who are watching film every single day, evaluating players from a skill set, and then using the analytics side of it to be able to determine, did you miss something along the way? Was there something that's so obvious that we didn't see it, but maybe numbers would explain that together?
How does this hire moving forward affect the head coaching search and the candidates who the Vikings have already interviewed?
Yeah, Mark Wilf said right away that Kwesi had been involved at some point, throughout this process. They already got that underway, which is good. And I know that Kwesi himself said that once his morning here was over and meeting people, he's going to be hitting the ground running to try to get the next head coach in place. And there are definitely some ties that you can draw to several of the candidates that are have already had their initial interviews in Minnesota. Kevin O'Connell has connection to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. He's the current Rams offensive coordinator. D'Amico Ryans was with Kwesi in San Francisco. He's the San Francisco defensive coordinator. Maybe there might be somebody else that's not on the list that we already know, but it sounds like, and I think this was a smart thing for the Vikings to do, get the initial process done. I mean, obviously, he's going to have access to the interviews, to talking with people, which candidates feel like a fit, which don't, and be able to expedite the process from there, because we're starting to see across the league coaches starting to fill in place. Denver's already hired somebody. Chicago has already hired somebody. The Vikings, there's always that domino effect of teams that once one goes, the next is probably going to go. And if they see somebody out there that they feel could potentially be the head coach somewhere else, they're going to want to act on it quickly. And I got the impression that this will be something that he wants to get addressed in the very, very short term.
in the grand scheme of things, big picture, what does a move like this say about the direction the Vikings organization is going?
It's a polar opposite from what they had the last 16 years here, and I think that change is a really good thing. You know, not saying that there was anything necessarily like detrimental to the old process, but sometimes you just need new perspectives, new voices, new philosophies to move the franchise forward. I mean, it's very clear that, you know, there were certain things that weren't working within this franchise, within the front office, within the coaching staff. You know, the last 2 seasons that the Vikings didn't make the playoffs. So doing, you know, what the Vikings did in making this out-of-the-box hire of somebody who is not a traditional football candidate, somebody who has the business background, somebody who has the analytics background, but really like the business system processes like part of this whole thing, I think will help move this organization forward in a way that maybe we weren't expecting, because it's hard to quantify that, and obviously nobody's going to come in here today and be like, you know, project out what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's career is going to be over the next 5 years. We can only look at what his background is, and it's incredibly impressive. I mean, he's an Ivy League grad. He went to Stanford too. He was talking to us after the press conference about potentially, you know, he thought his path might be in being an economics teacher, teaching financial literacy to players. I think that there's so much here that he'll do his part in knowing, in being successful in the areas that he knows really well. To me, the way he was talking about control over the 53-man roster and picking the next head coach for this organization, that he'll end up being somebody who has to delegate. Like personnel and evaluation, that's not completely his wheelhouse. Does he have, you know, some expertise in it? Sure, but like he's going to be deferring, you know, to run a salary cap. You need someone like Rob Brzezinski, who has been doing that here for the better part of 2 decades.
Someone open to collaboration.
Exactly, and you need somebody on the personnel side to be able to help you get ready for the NFL draft and before that, get ready for unrestricted free agency. And there's a lot of decisions that he has to make with the roster in terms of players that are currently on it that, you know, either might not be on it next year or other decisions like that have to be made. But he's got a lot on his plate. You know, over like basically everybody's got their first 100-day calendar, and his is going to be very, very busy.
And he's been busy the last 2 days. Funny enough, just flew in, hasn't even been home yet. So it has been quite the journey. But thank you so much for your insight to ESPN's Courtney Cronin.